how to write Java with domain redesign. In this video, I give you several steps and patterns how to use and apply domain redesign with Java today. To start implementing the static domain redesign, remember first, we always must have the clear strategic domain redesign. Therefore, we should know clearly about the ubiquitous language, we should know about the bounding context, the mapping context, and so on. Based off what you understood of the domain, you are capable of take that and move to the code. Otherwise, it will become completely messy. So in this scenario, let's explore the soccer championship where we have teams and each team has players and each player has at least a name and position or where they are play. To start, let me introduce you the first pattern that we're gonna cover today, the entity. So the entity is, let's say, a key part of the domain redesign where we define an object that is important to the business, and also it has your own unique identifier. In this case, let's use and start with the player, of course. So I have my player that must have a name, naturally, a ID, right? The unique identifier. So let's use UUID, and then the position where this player will play. In this case, we could use several ways to represent this position, right? Including, for example, the string. However, there is no validation on string. So I can put, for example, banana as play position. In this case, what I can do is also start exploring a value object. So the value object is usually an immutable object that does not contain identity, but represents some key point inside the domain. So think about money. So if the player has a salary, so we can use that. To simplify, let's define the position as an enum. So I will create my position here, and then I will create as a none. So for now on, my team, the player only has those positions. They are not able to be a banana player. So they can be a goalkeeper, defender, midfielder, and forward. There is no other option. So right now, my value object defines a validation to my entity. So as next step, let's define a constructor here. And here we go. So we have the entity that we know that has the unique ID or identifier. We have the name, the position, and this position. In this case, I'm summarized as a value object. However, a value object can have multiple faces. For example, let's identify money. A money, let's use the record, for example, could have one that we have the currency and the amount as big decimal. So let's imagine that my player has a salary, so we can use and create this. And naturally, I can define validations such as the currency must not be new, the amount must not be negative or zero, and so on. So that is the beauty of domain redesign, because we are building a semantic in the code that makes sense to us in the long term and also to the product. So if I come here and talk with the product, they will understand. They are not able to understand Java in several cases, but they are able to understand some key points. So they understood what is player, they understand what is position, they understand what is goalkeeper, and so on. So with those, the next step could be, for example, define a factory. So a factory is an object who is responsible to create in this case an entity. So let's create our player factory. So player factory. In this case, what I can do is let's create a forward player. Player create forward, and then we have a string, the name, and then we have this instruction right now. So player new UUID, or maybe sorry, UUID random, and then the name, and then the forward. So that is it. So we have right now our player factory. With that in mind, let's move on to the next step, that is our aggregator. So the aggregator, as the name said, we aggregate, or we have, let's say, an orchestrator of entities. In this case, let's create a team, because a player to go to any championship, they must be in a team. So I will create a team. The team will have a unique ID. So I using name and naturally the list of players here. So I'm using UUID to simplify. However, what we can do here is as well create a value object to define this team ID. So I can here, if I wish, team ID. I can define, for example, as record, UUID, ID, and then move here to my team, and then I can have right now not a, let's say, Java type, but a value object that belongs to my domain. So in this case, I'm gonna use mostly of the time UUID, but yes, you can explore value object as much as possible. Indeed, that is one mistake that I've seen several times. People see using only primitives to represent everything instead of using a proper validation such as value object that can help with achieve that goal. So we have the team, right? So we have the team that has the ID, the name, and player. Let's define a constructor. Okay. We can also, when talk about teams, aggregator root, it's natural to think one way to represent that information, especially at the database. And you might be familiar, especially if you are following me for a long time, about the repository. So we're gonna create our collection of team, that is the team repository. But remember, we don't need, let's say, to have this terminology. So you can define, for example, if my repository is to represent car, I can use garage. But convention by the market is usually natural to have the entity or the aggregator root and put repository as suffix. So in this case, team repository. So I will create a simple one that is my team, the save, and that is it for now. So naturally we can have multiple methods operation. But my point here is, as client, I have no clue first each database I'm using, or if I will insert or update my information based on the repository. So with that repository in mind, what I can do also is having my domain service. So my domain service is naturally, when talk about domain redesign, we are against let's say dynamic model. So we need to have rules and some logic here, but in some case we need to operate with different entities, or we have more complexity that does not make sense to put on the entity. So in this case, let's create our first domain service, that is my transfer service. where I have, let's say, a method called transfer, where I have my team player, I have my team source, and my team destination, right? Especially because I need to move the team to one place to another. So what I can do right now, so my first step is source remove. So as you could see, by default, the GitHub compiler tried to do a get and then remove, but that is wrong. That is a mis-encapsulation if you do that. So make sure that who will handle the logic is the aggregator root. So I have the remove player, and then my destination I will include. So I need to naturally create those two methods here. So player, and then add. And to avoid that mistake, what you can do is do a getter and make sure that you have collections on modifier list. This way, people who are not able to do what the GitHub compiler said, do a get and clean, do a get and remove, do a get and add. So who is in charge to handle players is the team. Everybody else is, in general, is mis-encapsulation, okay? So in this case, I'm moving between a player to team A to team B, and that is it. Naturally, I will need to cover the application service. Usually, this happens when we need to handle with more, let's say, bounded context or more components. In this case, what we can do is to create this kind of thing. So let's use, for example, in this scenario, I'm just transferring, but I'm not sending event, I'm not sending anything like that. So what I want to do right now is create application service. Let's define as transfer player use case, where I naturally need to have my team repository, my transfer service, and an event. So let's use an event here. So private final event. I will avoid to use CDI or anything here to be more event publisher, where I will create this event publisher right now. So I will define as interface. So I come here to my transfer use case. I need to define a constructor. And then I will create my, let's say, execute method. So to do that, I need to have my player, my team sort, my team destination. I do a transfer. I save both. And then what I can do is send and generate an event that belongs to my domain. So in this case, let's say that I want to have a new source player hired. So I need to hire a new soccer team. So I will define a new soccer hired that I need to have a team and a player. So it's not a num, but a record. So right now I have this event, and then in my use case, I want to publish this information. I don't have this method yet in my event publisher. I will create it. So let's define as object for now, just to simplify. Event. Naturally, if you are using Spring, go ahead, use Spring. If you are using CDI, you have the CDI event. So what I'm doing here is create the event. So I'm fire event. So what's happened with my soccer hired, the team and player. So probably I did the mistake of have this. And that is it. So right now I also introduced the event. So something happened on my domain. In this case, a new team has a new player. So right now another context like the marketing team can listen to that and generate some tweet posts and so on. So that is it for today. Hopefully you got an idea to the introduction of the direct domain. Naturally, just is a brief of what is domain-driven design. And if you want to learn more, that is my book where I cover step by step. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. And in the description, I have the code where you can access my book with a time discount.